My name's John Nagg from the British Council. Welcome to Africa. It's I was feeling that I was sitting in South Africa, in Cape Town or Durban, and Africa's a very big continent, and some of you were way back, even on the other side of the Sahara Desert in North Africa. And so thank you very much for coming forward. I'm here only to introduce my friend, Professor Sozinho Francisco Matsinhe, who's going to speak to us. I first met Professor Matsinhe in what was and what still is the youngest, the newest country in the world a few years ago, in Juba in South Sudan, at a conference to talk about language policy in the newest country in the world. At a very optimistic time for the new country. It was less than 1 year old, South Sudan. And it was memorable for me because it was really my introduction to working in Africa. And at a time when I was even more naive than I am now about Africa and languages in Africa. I'd been brought up to believe that Africa there was English-speaking Africa and French-speaking Africa and Portuguese-speaking Africa. And those myths were soon dispelled in my mind when I discovered that not only was it far more complicated than that, but in places like English-speaking Africa, only a very small proportion of the people there actually spoke or knew English. I was incredibly privileged to have Sozinho Matsinhe as, if you like, my first mentor as an introduction to that. And I remember sitting in the cafe in the conference for a few days that week in Juba. While we talked about Africa, he told me about it. And not only that, it was surprising to see the movement of people around the continent. And I have a very vivid memory of people, the waiters, the other people who were traveling through the new capital, and we were talking to them, and Sozinho, I remember, was talking to them, and from their look and the way they spoke, he was guessing and joking with them about where they might come from, and he was always right. He could tell where they come from. He's a true Pan-African. Africa is an incredibly linguistically diverse continent, as I was saying. There's an index of linguistic diversity with of world countries, with Papua New Guinea being the most linguistically diverse country in the world. But in that index of linguistic diversity, of the top 20 linguistically diverse countries in the world, 16 of the 20s are in Africa. There are 54 countries in Africa, 54 countries in the African Union, and Sozinho Francisco is the outgoing executive director of the Academy of African Languages, if you like, the Linguistic Academy of the African Union. But he has recently admitted to me he's only visited 53 of the 54 countries in the African Union. Originally from Mozambique, he was working as the director of Akalan in Mali, and has recently moved to Dakar in Senegal, to the Council for the Development of Social Science Research, another job, another regional job. He's a true Pan-African, and I'll leave you now with Professor Matsinhe to talk to us about multilingualism, marginalisation, and empowerment in Africa. Professor.
Forgot something. Good morning to everyone. Good morning to everyone. Thank you very much. In my village, if you are going to talk to people, you greet them first, because otherwise they will remain strangers. So, and my mother told me never to talk to strangers. So I have to greet you so that you remain strangers. John, thank you very much for your kind words. I really appreciate it. All I've been trying to do in my life is to be relevant to my own existence. When I tell people that I'm from Mozambique, they say, how come you speak English? And then sometimes I speak in French, they say, but what is that? I was speaking to my friend in Kiswahili, and somebody said, what is that? So this is my existence. In Africa, you are surrounded by many languages. So you have to try to be relevant to what you say around. Thank you very much, British Council, for inviting me. It's the third time I'm involved in something organized by the British Council. As John was saying, we started in Juba, then we went to Cape Town, and now we're here in India. India has got some kind of emotional attachment to somebody like me from Mozambique. The Portuguese got to my country by default while trying to get something from India. There was this notorious vagabond called Vasco da Gama. I call him vagabond because what followed in my country was a disaster. So he came here to become a hero in the Portuguese history. Then the Indian Union, most people don't know this, told Portugal to give back Damau, Goa, Idiu. They refused. So they mobilized a lot of people from their colonies to come to Goa to defend the territories. And one of my uncles came here to Goa as a soldier to defend what was Portuguese. They didn't do any job because the Indian troops, I think they stormed the three countries, they arrested the governor, and they chased him away. So this has got some kind of emotional attachment to me. In retaliation, the Portuguese went to Mozambique. I was sitting in my village. One morning, they came and they rounded anything which looked Indian and put it in a truck and sent it back to India. And there were some who were left behind, the cans. I look at them, but this one also, they're Indian. So my grandfather said, no, these are from Pakistan. And that's why they were left behind. So thank you very much for coming to listen to me. Now, I'm going to try to basically do two things. One is to make statements about things which we know. And the second one is to try to see how we can change our research agenda, how we can push the frontiers of research. So these are the two things I'm going to do. And I was given here a small gadget, but because I'm a pedestrian, when it comes to technology, I hope I will be able to operate it. This is the outline of my presentation. You might have seen in the program, I put an abstract there. I put it here again for you to go through it in case I run out of time or something happens. This is the abstract. In Africa, you have multilingualism. Then you have marginalization. And these are the two things we've been living with. There's some kind of, I heard many speakers yesterday saying that we tend to neglect whatever is not English or French or Portuguese, or it's not a former colonial language. In the process, we create marginalization because, as John was saying, you will see in one slide here, people don't speak only the former colonial languages in Africa, they speak other things. I still have to go out of this hotel to listen to how many people speak English in New Delhi. Probably they would. But in Africa, no. The vast majority of us don't speak the former colonial languages. We dream, we dance, we sing, we love, we cry in our languages. So we are multilingual by nature. Now, this is something I've been telling my students when I was teaching. I say to them, you know, if you speak many languages, you will cross many bridges. If you only speak one language, you will not reach the second bridge. And other people's worldview and cultures will remain forever strange to you. This is what I used to tell my students, and I think it's very close to the facts we know. Life is about mediating bridges. You meet people. There was a statement by the former and late president of South Africa. You speak to somebody in his language, it goes to his heart. It means you have crossed his bridges, so you get closer to him. So this is something I wanted to bring here because it's quite important what I'm going to say. Now, this is typical scenario of Africa. The red zone is where the vast majority of us live and stay. The green zone, it happens to be green, it's where the minority elites like myself and some few I see in front of me here from Africa can stay. They don't live there, but they can stay there. They live in the red zone, which is occupied by the vast majority of us. I've used this slide before, so some of you might be familiar with it. So this is really what I call the African linguistic mosaic. The vast majority of Africans speak their languages. They conduct their lives in their languages. But there is a small minority which speaks the former colonial languages. It's very complicated situation and very interesting. I come from a village which has got 500 homesteads. I mean, families, if you say, you know, an average family would have 5 to 10 people and you multiply that by 500, you will know how many people live there. But probably there are only 5 or 2 or 3 people who can speak Portuguese, depending on what you call to speak, whether to say good morning or to say how are you and all these type of things. These are the dynamics. Because of what I showed you in the previous slide, in Africa you have a generalized bilingualism or multilingualism. If you are in a place, say, Pretoria, Johannesburg, you speak any language you want of the African language, there will be always somebody who knows it. My colleagues from South Africa, they can help me in that one, but that's a fact of life. We are highly multilingual people. But despite all that, African languages tend to be confined to the informal sector. They mediate the informal discourse and personal interrelations. So if you want to travel throughout Mozambique and you know African languages, you will have a beautiful journey. If you know Portuguese and you want information, sometimes you'll have to stop to look for interpreters because that's not what happened. The former colonial languages are confined to the formal discourse. You might want to ask myself, what happened to the vast majority of Africans who don't speak the former colonial languages when they want to know what is happening in formal settings? It's quite a challenge. I was telling somebody a joke. On the 4th of October, I was going to my village, and the gentleman who is the president of Mozambique now was busy campaigning in my region. Many people came to listen to him. So I asked my nephew, he has got some basic knowledge of Portuguese. I said to him, what was the candidate saying? You know, you came to listen to him. He said, oh, he can dance very well. Because all he could hear and see was the dancing. Whatever was said in Portuguese was beyond him. So this is the reality of what we have. This leads to language and social exclusion. So if you don't speak the former colonial language, you're a good candidate for exclusion with all the consequences which comes with it. Like my nephew was excluded from the rally. All he could see was the president dancing. We drove 18 kilometers to my village. I said to him, but can you come all the way on foot just to see somebody dancing? We dance every day. But this is the reality of life. And therefore, mastering of the former colonial languages, it's like having a passport to a better life. People were asking yesterday why this obsession for English, because people believe you'll get a better job, you'll have all that comes with it. Even those who don't speak English, by the way, and even if you are to play a tape and you ask them which language is this one, they wouldn't tell. But in their minds, they think it's better to know what they don't know so that they can have a good life. Africa is very complicated. And because the post-colonial struggles in Africa have been for the control of the mind, it is very important. Mozambique became independent in 1975. After that, the struggle shifted to control the minds of the Mozambicans by many people from all walks of life, particularly those who own the world. If you read our newspaper, there's nothing about ourselves, but other things which we don't know. We go to school, the content of our books, our curriculum, have nothing to do with us. They teach you physics. You might want to ask in which forest will that animal stay, because it's so strange. The content has nothing to do with what you know. I was in Gulu, in northern Uganda, one day. I saw these beautiful actual ladies playing with pots on top of their heads up to 9. None of them was falling. I said, hey, wait a minute, this is physics in action. But you won't find that in any compendium I know of physics. You won't find it. They will tell them about strange things. And before they go to school, they will know that physics is very difficult. Why? Because the content is alien. There's a struggle to control the mind by all means. Now, there's some, forget about the headings. I couldn't find the better ones because I'm operating here in English, and English is my fourth language, so I couldn't get the better ones. But look at what I'm saying down there. The former colonial languages, because of all that I've been saying, are used for setting standards in socio-economic sphere and knowledge production. So you might know so many things outside the domain of the former colonial languages, but if it's not in colonial languages, it's irrelevant, it's hopeless, it's useless. The typical example we have from Africa is aloe vera. I think you know what aloe vera is. You go to any village in sub-Saharan Africa, they will tell you what aloe vera can do to you. But because it was not in the former colonial languages, it was left untapped until some very crazy and clever someone from somewhere took it and brought it to a laboratory. We pay a lot of money today for aloe vera, which we have in our gardens and everywhere, because it's not part of the scheme of the things which are conveyed in former colonial languages. So African language will always remain on the periphery of what matters. And development, which, as I see it, this is my definition of development, requires sharing of experiences, comparing notes. But African languages are not part of that process. They remain on the periphery. You won't find any minister of planning in Africa which will invite linguists to say, have a say in what we are going to do for the development of our country. You won't find that. And yet, development is about sharing ideas in a particular language. This is a great paradox. I was impressed yesterday when the Indian minister said he came from the Ministry of Rural Development, and he said they use a lot of local languages. I said, wow, I should go probably work there, even if I were to carry their bags, and I will see what they are doing around. Because really in Africa, that's not the case. So the knowledge and wisdom which is deposited in African languages remained untapped. That was the case of aloe vera I was trying to tell you. Another paradox, Africa is a multilingual place, as I said, but research, this is very important because of what we had being said in this room. Research on multilingualism has been inspired and informed by the desire to solve pedagogical problems. Children are not learning well because they learn in a language they don't know, so let's get them started in their own language. They will learn better Portuguese, English, French, or whatever. Now the question you would want to ask is, if there were no pedagogical problems, what would you do with the languages which are part and parcel of the life of the learner? This is quite a big challenge. I was happy when there was a form which we are supposed to complete to say which research agendas we would like to see. We need, as I will say later on, to push the frontiers of our research so that we do something differently. So the debate on the medium of instruction tends to be reduced. I was supposed to write to be reduced. I told you English is my fourth language, forgive me, to either or. So the debate on the mother tongue, because the research is about solving pedagogical problems. Now, the debate on the medium of instruction is not how can one use his language to learn better, is either or. We say, well, if you learn in English, Portuguese, and French, yeah, you will be clever, even national unity will be there. If you learn in your mother tongue, we are not sure whether you will count out 1 billion, so that's hopeless. You better leave it aside. So this is one of the paradoxes. And the way I see it, it shouldn't be either or. We need some kind of complementarity. We need some kind of linguistic equity in the same way we need gender equity. But I think you would agree with me that we have not been able to do that. We reduce the discussion to either or. So the biggest challenge is to push the frontiers of research. This will mean, because so far research on African languages has been confined to descriptive and theoretical aspects of the languages. Now we need to move from that and focus on applied research. How do we do this? Well, we need to explore the spaces which are being created by the ICT. The good example of this, I mentioned the multilingual applications. 2 years ago or so, in Kenya, banks were really put under pressure because there was a combination of, you will see in the next slide, of technology and language. So banking was reduced to the use of cell phone in Kiswahili, and anyone could do that. You didn't know English. I was there a few weeks ago. I went to buy something to drink. It was very hot, and somebody said to me, "What is your M-Pesa number?" So just have a number. There's no cash here. You give them a number, you pay everything and go. And in Kiswahili, not in English. So I think this is a good practice. It's an example that if we push the frontiers of research, we would be able to get technology that speaks the language of the people. Most of the time, technology stands like monsters, you know. I was telling one president when I was working for the African Union who said he wants to give, I think our colleague and my friend Johnson will know, Simpson will know whom I'm talking about. He said he wants to give one tablet to each and every kid. And I said to him, in which language? He said, oh, I never thought about that. I said, well, don't give monsters to your kids. Because if it's not in the language they speak, it will remain a monster. It will threaten them. And he looked like me, like that's what he was going to arrest me, but we became very good friends. So if we push the frontier of research and we do applied research, we will be able to produce technology which will speak the language of the people, and we stand a good chance to reduce the exclusion I told you about. This is a cell phone. I put M-Pesa in red. So if you are in Nairobi, you just use your cell phone to send money to the village, to pay for things. Banks were put under pressure. They were in a big threat because M-Pesa did all the financial operations. There was no queue. There was nothing. It's on your pocket. It's at home. So it was really became something very, very popular. So this is an example of applied research where we can marry language with technology. Some Kenyans believe that the success of M-Pesa was because of the higher rate of existence of cell phones in their country. I told them no. It was because of Kiswahili. M-Pesa is found in other countries, including my own country, Mozambique. Nobody knows what is it because it's in Portuguese. It's advertised on TV where everything is in Portuguese, so you can compare the two situations, one in Kenya and one in Mozambique. In South Africa also we have an experience of applied research. You can go to the bank with your card now and get your money in your mother tongue. It's a very good example. The research there which needs to be done is to find out how many people select which language, whether they are mother tongue or English. But it's something which shows it's possible you can do it. So this is what I wanted to bring to your attention. Now, this is the conclusion. If we are serious about pushing the frontiers of research on languages, which will change even our mindset, we need to explore the interplay between the ICT and the African languages. I put African languages here because what I'm concerned with. This will allow us to create ICT multilingual applications. I was once in China. It was one place where I was convinced that probably you can do other things, not only in English. The Chinese, each one of them had a cell phone. And I was saying, but these people are very clever. All of them get cell phone wherever they go. No, it's because they put their dictionary, a multilingual dictionary. So if they wanted something in English, I asked them, what is this in English? They will go to their cell phone. At first, I didn't know what they were doing. But in fact, we were translating the words. And it gave them what they wanted. So if we explore the space and windows of opportunity which are created by ICT, we can go very far. Climate change, we can put there to tell the peasants that, look here, the rain cycle has changed. So don't expect to plant when it's not raining because of climate change. Now we speak about climate change. It's fashionable these days, but nobody knows what is it in my village because it's not put into their languages. All they know that it doesn't rain in the time they expect it to rain. So they don't know when to plant or what is going to happen. So this is what really I wanted to suggest by way of conclusion. And if we did this, then we'll be able to empower African languages. We'll be able to move them from the periphery to the center and to the socio-economic mainstream. And the exclusion, the language attitudes might change. This is like struggling for independence. It won't happen tomorrow. But what I'm saying here is that it's possible and it can happen. Does this look familiar? Thank you very much for listening. Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much, Sozinho. So we have a few minutes in which we can have some questions or begin a conversation that we can continue and link perhaps what Dr. Matsinhe has been saying to what other people have been saying. So who'd like to kick off? We start at the back, the lady at the back there. We've got a microphone.
Works now? Okay, thank you very much. This is Anuradha from Inalco, Paris. So I very much appreciate the remarks on the necessity for work on African languages to go beyond descriptive linguistics. I think to some extent it's true of languages in many parts of the world. The study of language has really remained confined to certain streams. And so I would be very curious to know what initiatives have been taken in African universities in this sense of expanding the scope of study of language in context. That's really what it's all about, I think.
What initiatives have been taken to expand the research agenda? Is that your...
Expanding the study of language, yes, beyond the traditional focus on description, which you mentioned.
Well, thank you very much for the question. When I was working for Aklan, we did quite a number of practical things to push the research agenda. One of them was to produce a linguistic atlas for Africa. When you talk about languages in Africa, they say there are too many. Which one are you going to start to develop? As if having many things was a trouble or a problem or liability of some kind. So we've done practical things. Linguistic Atlas of Africa is one of them. It's an ongoing project. We produce spell checkers for these languages. And many other things. I didn't want to talk about that because it would probably take me away from what I want to say here. But I can share with you. I think I know the person who put the question. You can sit down. I'll give you the list and explain to you what we've been trying to do practically to change the paradigm in terms of research.
Thank you very much, Dr. Matsinhe, for a wonderful presentation. What I'd like to raise is the fact that there has already been huge, interesting, fascinating, amazing research out there that looks at ICT, that looks at the digital, that looks at this new concept of how we use African languages and the the post-colonial languages in innovative ways. So my question is, how do we ensure that that work gets on the radar of people in a position of power? Because it is there, the work is there, the research is there, but what is not there, in a sense, is an infrastructure that makes that work visible to the people who need to know about it. So can you help? Can you advise? I mean, I do see that what we need is a better relationship between universities and researchers and also NGOs and other organizations, but I often, it seems like we're dealing with universities going in one direction, research in one direction, and other initiatives, and we need to have a better relationship between them, because you've talked about technology speaks the language of the people, allowing them to cross many bridges. It's there. How do we make it happen?
Well, thank you very much. There are two things I said here which might answer your question or your concern, address your concern. One of them was that languages have not been part of the development discourse in real life in many countries, I know, particularly in Africa. So we believe that you can achieve sustainable development in a language you don't speak. That has not happened anywhere I know in the world. This is one thing. The second thing I said, all the work you referred to so far has been used to address pedagogical problems, how to make people learn better. We did some kind of a survey to see what was out there when I was working at Akalan. And frankly speaking, most of this work is about how to help people learn the second language, how to reach the decision makers. I'm not their advocate or anything like that, but the situation has changed for the better in Africa. For one simple reason, if you take into account that most African countries achieved their independence 50 years ago, by African standards, 50 years is a lot of time. You are considered to be old, and if you come from a village, you take your clan and relative to show them where you want to be buried when you die. So it's quite a long period of time, and not much has happened in terms of changing our lives for the better. So we are forced to look everywhere. Everybody is being invited to the party. If you check what the African Union calls Agenda 2063, you will see that pillar number 5 is devoted to culture. We are busy implementing it throughout Africa. Culture is there, language is there, because we believe in order to be where we've never been before, we can go get there as ourselves, not hitched to somebody's train whose destination we can't tell. So there are things which are changing. We need a lot of work to do. We need partnerships. We need to make noise together. But I'm convinced, based in what I've seen in Africa, that now there's more political will to talk about languages, research, more than ever before. All the 54 member states I know, including the ones which I never visited, they have discussions on language policy, which bring ICT. So it's up to us. These are the windows I was talking about, which are opening. It's up to us to make use of them. I think this answers your question.
It seems to me that both the question and the answer bring up this issue of the, if you like, neglect of international and national policy makers on the issue of language, which obviously I've noted over the last 3 of this conference series in Sri Lanka, South Africa, here in India, how really the issue of language doesn't feature enough in the MDGs, the SDGs, and so what you seem to be saying is there's some hope here, at least in the African vision for the 2063, that there's more focus on language, which is a great thing. There was a question over there on the gentleman on that table.
Thank you very much for the presentation, which was very inspiring to me. And coming from Tanzania, which is your neighbor there, I can think about what the language does to a person. The language you originally know influences the way you think, in a way. And when you change into Portuguese or English, then there is a problem of vocabulary, etc., etc. We are doing a study in Tanzania now of trying to help the children to make that transition between their indigenous knowledge and English. One problem we are facing, which I'm sure other African countries do face, is that in Tanzania we have adopted one national language, Kiswahili, which I think you know that is not the mother tongue of the 120 different linguistic groups. And therefore some children, especially in the rural area, when you are talking about biology and about classification of living things or anything else, these children have their own understanding from their own vernacular, which may be different from what they are learning, even in Swahili, which is the language, which Professor Ajit Mohanty tried to describe in terms of the difference between the vernacular, the regional language, and the national language and English. So this complex situation makes really things quite difficult, and I appreciate your focus that we should do more research in this area. But I hope that once we take this route of research, we also recognize that there are a lot of other issues, such as indigenous knowledge, which we have to address. Because of a variety of linguistic groups, there are also a variety of knowledge forms, which, for example, literature and drama and so on in certain languages is so unique that, if you try to translate it into something else, it cannot be quite the same. And so I think I really appreciate the contribution you are making, that the complexity of the multilingual nature in Africa must be appreciated, but at the same time, the research agenda ahead of us, it must also be very carefully put together. Maybe you would like to comment on what can be done in the transition between the vernacular into either a national language or a dominant language, and then into the English or Portuguese. Because in Africa, some countries have voted for one national language, like Tanzania or Ethiopia, Amharic. South Africa, 9 languages. Nigeria, maybe the languages in the schools, 3 or 4. And so this is a variation depending on the, of course, history and the culture of those languages. And maybe you want to comment on what African leaders, if you were to talk to them today, should do in promoting research in this area. Thank you.
Well, my neighbor and Ndugu means comrade in Kiswahili. I didn't know you were from Tanzania. Thank you very much for the contribution. What you are saying is really a fact. It's not a fiction of any kind. But a point here to be made is that we need to convince ourselves, whether it's regional, national, or village, or whatever language we are talking about, we need to convince ourselves that it's useful for anything we want to do with it. Because this is the starting point which has caused a lot of trouble in Africa and a misunderstanding. They say we've got too many languages, so which one are you going to use? As if having too many things was a sin or a crime of some kind. I do agree with you. And Tanzania has got a very, very interesting experience. You had Swahili, which gave you many things which I don't find in any African country. Your political awareness, for example, derives from the fact that even the parliament debates are in Swahili. And then you realize that there are people who don't speak Swahili. You produced one of the best linguistic atlas I've ever seen in my life, going up to the village to say how many languages you have got. So thank you very much for your contribution.
Professor, I'm Pema from Bhutan. As of today, I believe there are as many as 2,000 distinct languages in Africa. And although you have a couple of indigenous writing systems, script, but many of the African languages tend to use the Latin script and Arabic script. And as we know, the African languages have the greatest number of distinct sounds, and as languages spread, the number of sounds reduce in the Asia-Pacific region, and when it comes to Oceania, the number of sounds became the least. But because the African languages have more number of sounds, and when you use script of another languages, which was designed to represent another languages, there could be mismatch. And it could endanger the continuity of the distinct features of African languages, in the sense that the children may not be able to acquire those unique sounds through those scripts. So my question is, is there any way to resolve these issues? Are you planning to? Does some of the African countries have plans to invent a specific script for your own languages? Thank you.
I'm impressed by your knowledge of Africa. When you were speaking yesterday, I was asking myself, how many people do speak English in your country? But I didn't want to ask you that question. On a more serious note, there are two things here. One is being pragmatic. Another one is to conduct research. When I was working for the African Union, I was confronted by three gentlemen, very sophisticated gentlemen from, I won't mention the countries, but some of us know what I'm talking about. They say they've invented a writing system for the African languages, which will do justice to the complexity of the sounds, as you are saying. And they were therefore asking the academy to help them popularize their research and ideas. I spent a week with one of them trying to understand. I summoned all my training in linguistics. And believe you me, I went to some of the best schools. I'm not blowing my own trumpets, but I'm stating a fact. So we went through the complexity of what he was suggesting. In the end, I told him, look here, you and I, if we suggest these things, two things will happen to us. Or we'll be killed or go to jail. He said, why? I said, look here, you know how many computers and things are out there using the Latin script for African languages. So we are going to tell people that they should throw these things away. I don't know how we're going to do it. So this is a pragmatic way of doing things. The other one is that really there are very few isolated cases, I'm under correction here, of people who have proposed an alternative to the Latin alphabet or writing systems we use for African languages. So we need to do a lot of research in that direction so that we talk about things we know. One of the gentlemen I'm talking about, he brought something which I told him in the end, there were three. This one I told him, this is fantasy. Nobody will take you seriously. You should go back home and do your homework properly. Because it was very, very strange. I couldn't understand. So we need to do serious research to see how we can, if we want to change. Secondly, we need to remain pragmatic. We have gone a long way in using the Latin script. We don't want to say, hey, let's throw it away, while we're still convincing people that African language, they can be useful for whatever we want them to do, including development. So this is how I would reply your question. So I invite any research you know to come forward. I'm no longer working for the African Union, but I can go and knock on the door of the African Union. I say, there's somebody here who came up with something which will truly represent our languages.
Hal Coleman.
Thank you. Just a quick note in response to this very interesting discussion. There's a fascinating blog called Beyond Niamey, I've forgotten the name of the owner of the blog, and he discusses this issue of scripts or modifying Latin script for African languages. He's not pushing any particular line. He just talks about the challenges and the difficulties, and particularly ways of communicating health messages through mobile phones and so on, using appropriate scripts. It's really, really interesting. I recommend it.
We have time for one or two more comments. John Simpson has a comment.
Thanks very much, Sozinho, for another very thought-provoking talk. Just picking up on the Latin theme, actually, and linking it to something very modern, the development of the M-Pesa model. I believe it's now the case from recent press reports that M-Pesa has now spread its wings beyond the borders of Africa to one or two countries in Asia. So, which is a reminder of, I think the quote was attributed to Pliny the Elder, who was actually quoting originally from the Greeks when he said, ex Africa semper alicid novae, out of Africa there's always something new. And then Pace is demonstrating that, yet again, that Africa is leading the way in innovations and new ideas. I think the question I'd like to come to is actually related to the challenge about broadening the research agenda. And forgive me if the example is from the education sector and issues of pedagogy. But I was thinking in terms of corpus planning as one quite clear example of applied research in terms of preparing, a whole number of African languages, getting them ready for use in formal domains such as education. So the expansion of the lexicon, vocabulary, etc., so that they're ready to take on that load of more sort of formal academic domains of use. And I can thinking of organizations like SIL, for example, which has done a lot of work with governments to try to promote that and to help ready the ground. But I think the bigger issue then is back to your question of mind control. And how do you go about changing mindsets of decision makers and influencers? That's about status planning, really. And if at best attitudes towards local African languages are ambivalent, and policymakers, decision makers don't see the value or the importance of extending those beyond the early years, how do we actually go about, in practical terms, addressing that and challenging those mindsets? I mean, I know besides yourself, one or two distinguished African linguists like Professor Ayo Bangbozi and the late Professor Neville Alexander have talked about the need for the intellectualization of African languages, elevating their status in such a way as people are convinced they can occupy those more formal spaces. But how in practical terms, can that actually be addressed, recognizing that challenge is actually very real and those mindsets are actually quite strong? Thank you.
So how can we elevate the status of languages there's a gentleman, Kiwi at the back there. Yeah, okay, I'll take a couple of questions. We take a couple of last comments and then...
Just a piece of information that might be of interest to the gathering. There is a conference coming up in April next year in New York on language and the sustainable development goals of the United Nations, a conference on language and the United Nations. So when you rightly remarked that language is a missing variable in the development discourse, perhaps this might be of interest. Thank you.
Where is that?
New York. New York next year, 2016.
Okay. Debanjan Chakravarti.
Hi, this is a quick comment on the discussion on Howell commented on scripts, and it started a little bit earlier. One of the things I think we should park in the research agenda is to look at scriptural diversity and their role in development, because one strand of the discussions in this conference has been about how technology is enabling many languages without scripts to be present, but whether scripts also have a role to play. And it's very interesting to hear about ideas on scriptural transition. And I have colleagues in India, maybe Giri, yourself, you could comment on this. An Indian state, Manipur, transitioned from the Bengali script it used to new Manipuri script, Meitei script. So we do have an example to study about the implications and impact of such a transition for a variety of users, students of course, but also in a range of contexts.
Okay, thank you. So just time for concluding comment on maybe some of those issues. Sozinho.
Yes, once again, thank you very much. I will start from my friend, Dr. Simpson. The corpus planning and status planning, yes, I think we need to take them together, and because that will help in many ways. Changing the mindset is not something which will happen tomorrow. One of the things which make me sad is that we talk about globalization, but globalization is selective. It only sells the information which is useful for certain people, including those who are interested in controlling our minds. We need, and the decision makers and the politicians, by the way, they're under pressure. As I said, 50 years in Africa is a lot of time. You can't keep on telling stories which don't, as I would say in my mother tongue, they will boil the pot. No, you need a story which will make the pot turn around with something for you to eat. So they are under tremendous pressure. What I'm convinced about is that we researchers, we need to talk to them. We need to communicate to them. We need to explore each and every opportunity we have to tell them. There's a conference in New York. I believe some of us will go there to say, in some places where people don't speak the former colonial language, sustainable development can only happen in the language they speak, and full stop. And we present the facts. This will help us a lot. One of the tragedies about the African continent is that we tend, the decision makers tend to confine whatever they do to their terms of office. So it's 5 years planning strategy, not a national huge plan which will live with you forever. And there's no guarantee that after the 5 years term in the office, the one who will come won't change this and start something else. So this is one challenge. We need to recognize this. I used to tell the ministers and the president, as you know, we need plans which are above the government of the day to get somewhere where we've never been before. So I do appreciate what you are saying. Corpus planning is very, very, very technical and easy to do. The intellectualization, my big brothers you mentioned, I was with them at Akalat. We tried to do that. You can do it. But we need to cross the bridge to the other side where the decision makers are. And as I'm saying, this is a golden opportunity because there are so many things happening which convince the people that, you know, we need something new, which we have never had before. And it's golden opportunity for all of us to say, look, one of the things which has never taken us anywhere is to exclude people because of the language they speak or the way they do things. No, I think that addressed the question. The scripts, I do agree. We need to do research. As I said here, I found somebody who's, if I was to bring him here, all of you will be converted to his camp. You know, he invented something very sophisticated. He took a laptop. I'm not sure whether that laptop was meant to sell what is propagating. But we sit down and say, look, we need to do more research. What you are telling me here won't take us far. Also, we need to be pragmatic. One of the things, you know, in terms of being pragmatic, which happened in Africa, was to say, well, let's maintain the colonial boundaries. That was a pragmatic decision, which happened to be useful. So in the same way, we can say, let's maintain the Latin script of writing our languages. Let's use the international phonetic alphabet. It doesn't work, but it will save us some other big troubles. One of them would be to divert our attentions to the focus of, you know, developing African languages and start talking about things which may not take us far. This is how I see it.
Thank you very much. We can continue the discussions now in the coffee break, which lasts another nearly half an hour until 11:45, when the next parallel sessions start. Meanwhile, could you all please join me in thanking Dr. Matsinhe for his...